You've been listening to President Trump holding what was clearly an election rally at the White House. The crowd wearing matching T-shirts and red Trump hats chanted 4 more years, as well as "We love you," as Mr. Trump continued to undermine public confidence in the upcoming election and falsely claimed that his election challenger, Democrat Joe Biden, is a socialist. The president telling his supporters to, quote, vote them into oblivion. For more on all of this, I want to bring in Philip Bump and Marquise Francis. Philip is a national correspondent for the Washington Post, and Marquise is a national reporter for Yahoo News. Gentlemen, good to have both of you with us today. Philip, I'm going to start with you. This event certainly looked like a campaign event held at the White House. Is this a problem? Other presidents wouldn't dream of doing such a thing, but President Trump and his supporters don't seem like they care about those rules anymore.
No, I think that is an understatement. I mean, we've seen for basically since Donald Trump took office that they're largely indifferent to what's called the Hatch Act, which prohibits the use of official resources for campaigning. We've had lots of members of the Trump administration be cited for having violated the Hatch Act. The administration has continually shrugged at it. We saw, of course, the convention last month in which President Trump used the White House as a backdrop for his acceptance speech. He used a naturalization ceremony. He used a pardoning, all as ways to use his office as a way of bolstering his campaign. You know, this is another example, I think, of the myriad ways in which Donald Trump simply breaks the rules, and over time, people stop getting agitated about it because he breaks the rules all the time. I think this is another example of that happening.
I appreciate what you're saying, Philip. I'm wondering if we should just pause then and talk about why the Hatch Act exists. Why is it a problem to have a sitting president running for re-election using the tools of his presidency to try and advocate for him staying in power?
Well, I think sort of theoretically, the idea is that the presidency isn't Donald Trump's. He is out of office on January 20th unless he wins re-election, right? This isn't as though it's his presidency that he gets to carry as long as he wants to. The people gave it to him for 4 years. And so essentially, he is using taxpayer money to bolster his campaign. He is using the money that we pay in our taxes, which goes to staffing the White House, which goes to paying the salaries of the people that work at the White House, that goes to all of the various parts of government. He is leveraging that money to aid his campaign. So in both the theoretical sense of him using something that isn't really his, but also in the practical sense of his using taxpayer money to boost his campaign, both of those are why the Hatch Act exists. However, the Hatch Act doesn't really have a mechanism for holding people to account beyond the shame that might be felt by a politician who violates the Hatch Act, which is apparently in short supply.
All right, Marquise, this event was held with Candace Owens and her group Blexit. What can you tell our viewers about the group and why the president decided to hold this event with her?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, if you're unfamiliar with Candace Owens, she is a very prominent conservative, a black woman who has been very out front in support of President Trump since he was inaugurated in 2016. But she's also been very out front and outright when it comes to black issues. As a black woman, she's been able to spin a lot of things that most of the black community may not agree with. But as a black woman, she's been able to get out in front and support folks like Daniel Cameron, the Kentucky Attorney General down, where the Breonna Taylor situation happened in Louisville. And this group is made up of people of like minds. And even though this was billed as an official White House event, that does bring into question the accountability, as Philip pointed to, because this was coordinated by this Candace Owens Blexit group. And it's full of conservative advocates and supporters who are there to shout, once again, 4 more years for the president and just to push the name of Joe Biden to the ground.
Yeah, Marquise, we heard the president touting the black and Hispanic unemployment rates that he was celebrating. Obviously, we know that those unemployment rates aren't so good anymore. And the president again repeated his claim that he has done more for the black community than any president since Abraham Lincoln. How does that kind of self-praise play with black voters?
Yeah, so I mean, when I continue to hear the president speak, about that, he says, I've done more than any of the presidents since Lincoln for the black community. I had to go back and actually look at the unemployment rate for black America, and the numbers actually do support what he is saying, but you cannot take them just at face value. We have to understand the economy in which the president actually took in. President Obama and VP Joe Biden inherited a pretty bad economy from Bush, and they actually turned things around and got things going down. So when Trump inherited that, it's almost like getting a car while it's already going and jumping in the driver's seat and continuing to drive it. So I think you can no longer take numbers just at face value. There's always going to be nuances and reasons for it. But just to your second part of the question, Black America, when Trump says he's done more for Black America, it's almost like a laughing matter, I would say, for most. I saw this video on The Cut this week where they said, what would it take for you to vote for President Trump? And it was literally a minute and a half of people just laughing. Because for most of Black America, they do not see themselves in the White House. When you think about top prominent Black people within the White House, the only name that comes to mind is Ben Carson. And he doesn't, once again, represent Black America. You think of Omarosa, who was pretty much shoved out of the White House. And, my follow-up to that question is, what have you done for Black America? He briefly touched upon the Platinum Plan for the Black community, which is apparently a $500 billion plan to invest in the Black community. And he even noted that Black people in Black America has been consistently shut out of investing in properties and ownership. So once again, it goes back to his famous phrase of make America great again. When was it great for Black America? As a young Black man myself, when I look at the White House, I'm seeing a lot of white faces. Donald Trump, the vice president. Where do I see myself? When President Obama assaulted to the top person in this country, I, for the first time, saw myself in the White House and the possibilities that were possible on that stage. And for the President Trump to continue to tout that he's done more for Black America than any president, it just doesn't hold any weight.
Yeah, we heard Democratic vice presidential nominee Kamala Harris making the point that of the lifetime appointment for federal judges, 50 that President Trump had made, that not a single one of them was African American. All right, Philip, let's talk about the overall messaging of this event, the president's law and order messaging, and why he may have chosen to talk about this today. What have you learned?
Yeah, honestly, it's a great question. It hasn't been messaging that's working for him. I think he really still thinks that there are going to be people who he can instill enough fear in them that they'll go out and vote for him. But one of the things we didn't hear today, which I think is incredibly significant, both because of how important it is in the country and how important it is in this moment for Trump, is we didn't hear much about the pandemic. And it's fascinating to hear Donald Trump talk about law and order and how we need safety and how we have, how we need to be worried about communists, which, of course, there are no communists in the Democratic Party. There may be some Democratic socialists. There are no communists, which is a totally different thing. But he did not talk about the pandemic. And the CDC, if you look at CDC numbers, Black Americans are 2.6 times as likely to have contracted the coronavirus as are white people. They're 4.7 times as likely to have been hospitalized with coronavirus, and they're twice as likely to die from the virus. That is a much bigger threat to Black America than is law and order in the context in which Donald Trump talks about. This is a very real thing which is permeating the United States at this point in time. Obviously, Donald Trump doesn't want to talk about it. It doesn't help him politically. He thinks law and order does, so that's what he decides to focus on.
Is that, you say that hasn't been a winning strategy for the president, but has it cut into Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's message, particularly with white voters, educated voters, and suburban voters, who we know the Democrats are trying to target?
No, it hasn't. We've seen poll after poll after poll. Donald Trump has been on this message essentially since the George Floyd protests began at the end of May. Donald Trump has tried to pivot from that, from the focus on Black Lives Matter, from the focus on systemic racism within law enforcement. He's tried to pivot to this idea of this threat of you heard him say in the speech that liberals are burning down cities and so on and so forth. He's tried repeatedly to do that, and polling continues to show. Joe Biden is seen as preferable on issues of law enforcement by most Americans, that he's gaining no traction. And in fact, his poll numbers are worse now than they were a month ago relative to Joe Biden. It's just not working. But he likes to talk about it. I think he feels like it makes him feel tough. And I think he feels like maybe it's still his best shot somehow. It's been 3 or 4 months. It hasn't gained any traction, and I'm not sure why he's still doing it.
All right, Marquise, you heard Philip talk about the coronavirus. As far as we know, the president still has COVID-19, and yet the president says he's holding a campaign rally in Florida on Monday. Looking forward to that, do you expect that he will talk more about COVID? Do you think that he will talk more about any of the other issues, or do you think he'll continue on this same thread, much of what we've heard today?
I think the obvious answer is things are going to continue as they've been going. You know, Philip started this off by saying there are almost no rules when it comes to President Trump, and we're continuing to see that happen. As you mentioned, to date, we still have not had a negative test for the president, and we're seeing other leaders around the country not actually even get tested. Lindsey Graham in South Carolina had a debate this week, and it was canceled because his opponent, Jamie Harrison, said, "I'm willing to debate you. It needs to be in person, not virtually, but you need to take a test, and it needs to be negative." Lindsey Graham has denied wanting to take that. That debate never happened. So coming up to Florida with this campaign event coming up, we saw the president today. He called it the Chinese virus, something that he has said from the beginning, not trying to take blame for anything that has happened in this country. He continues to talk about a vaccine that will come out very, very soon. We're less than 4 weeks away from the general election. There still is no vaccine. All doctors, experts continue to say it's very, very unlikely, not only because it takes so long to produce this vaccine, but it's also a 2-dosage vaccine, which means someone has to take it once and then a few weeks later take a second dosage for it to possibly be effective. And poll numbers continue to show Americans really do not trust the vaccine that they believe is forced and pushed out in a fast-paced fashion. So coming up on this campaign in Florida, once again, even going back to the first question about Black America, if Donald Trump really believes he's positive and good for the Black community, knowing those disproportionate numbers affecting the Black community, you would think he would be more safe, wear a mask, tell people, get tested. But instead, we don't even know his status himself. He continues to go around. We saw hundreds of people packed on the White House lawn, most wearing masks, but still, we saw the super spreader event a few weeks ago, and we see how many leaders across the country are now getting sick. It really just makes no sense, and I feel as though this Florida event looks like a recipe for disaster.
Philip, I want to bring you into this conversation. You had mentioned before that the polls show Joe Biden doing better on law and order, and in fact, most of the polls say that Biden is doing better in most of those battleground states, and certainly in the national polls. But the polls didn't look so good for Trump the last time he ran for president, and yet here he is in the Oval Office. So is it possible that Democrats are too confident at this point?
I mean, if there's one thing you can always say, it's the Democrats might be too confident. It certainly is the case that Donald Trump could still win the election. But there are a couple of things that are very different from 2016. The first is that, to your point, Joe Biden has big leads in battleground states to the extent that if you apply the exact same errors that occurred in those battleground states in 2016 to how Biden is ahead now, Biden still wins those states. His leads are now currently bigger than the error that existed in 2016. Right now, if you applied those errors in 2016 to the existing polls right now, Joe Biden wins by more than 100 electoral votes. Not only that, but on the national picture, he's doing much better relative to Trump than was Hillary Clinton at this point. And his lead has been much, much, much more stable. Hillary Clinton's went up and down and up and down, and it was sort of a sine wave where she would pull away from Donald Trump and then she'd be very close to him. We haven't seen that with Biden. Biden's been consistently much better positioned in the polls nationally than Donald Trump. His floor, the lowest point of his support, has always been at least 5 points higher than Donald Trump's ceiling. That wasn't the case in 2016. There were times when Donald Trump actually took a lead over Hillary Clinton. So there are all these indicators that, yes, absolutely, things could change. But the key thing to remember about 2020 is so far things haven't changed. Essentially, since Donald Trump took office, Democrats have hated him and Republicans have loved him, and independents have been skeptical of him. That's the pattern we see now in 2020 as well, and it's a recipe right now as it stands, barring some massive shakeup in this campaign, which this being 2020 could certainly happen. Barring that, though, Donald Trump's got a really, really tough path ahead.
Yeah, but the other thing, Philip, is that we know that overwhelmingly Democrats are disproportionately voting via absentee ballots, and that Republicans say that they intend to vote in person. So it's quite possible that on election night, it may look like Donald Trump has won re-election before all those absentee ballots are counted. What do you anticipate? Because we heard the president again today cast doubt on election security, cast doubt on our ability to believe the results as long as he isn't winning the presidency. What do you think will happen on election night if, in fact, the in-person voting seems to indicate that he is doing better than he actually is, and he doesn't end up winning the votes necessary, even though it looks like initially maybe he is?
So Donald Trump has a two-part strategy for winning despite losing, and that is this: have people feel comfortable going out to polling places and intimidate voters out of actually voting on Election Day, then using the Election Day results to claim that those are the real results by leveraging this. For months he's been saying that mail-in ballots are prone to fraud. It's a lie. They aren't. There is very, very little fraud that actually occurs. There are certainly mistakes and errors and problems, but there isn't really fraud, particularly on a systemic level, particularly nationally. So he's going to argue, though, after the votes are in on Election Day, oh, we can't count any of those other ballots because they're all fraudulent, which is nonsense. This is why we keep hearing this refrain from the media and from other leaders. Election night is not the end of the campaign. We have to wait for these ballots to be counted. And one of the things we're seeing is there's actually polling that suggests that Americans understand that message. That Americans have actually incorporated the idea that we're not going to know necessarily on election night who won this thing, that we're going to have to wait for several days to actually find out. That, I think, is good. But absolutely, Donald Trump's going to do everything in his power to tell Americans something different.
And Marquise, I want to give you the opportunity to have the last thoughts on the same topic, election night. And this event was billed as a peaceful protest. Obviously, we are looking at the potential for more protests on election night, regardless of who ends up winning. What are your thoughts and cautions as people are looking towards November 3rd?
Yeah, I mean, it's really shaping up in many ways, unfortunately, to be a circus. We've seen the president in the past few weeks actually embolden people to be poll watchers, unofficial poll watchers, and go there. And we know in a lot of southern states you can have open carry. So there's almost been this push to go to polls and intimidate people. We've seen in states like Texas, certain counties that had over 10 polling sites now only have one. But we've also seen a push from NFL teams and NBA teams to open up their arenas for polling stations. So there seems to be a bunch of give and take when it comes to a lot of big cities and states. But it's really shaping up to be a circus on that night. And like Philip mentioned, the president is seemingly also gearing up to delegitimize this entire voting process, as he's done. And obviously, he's now trying to ram through a new Supreme Court justice, which obviously would give conservatives the overwhelming majority, where if he does challenge the end result of the election, it would go to the Supreme Court and it possibly would turn out in his favor. So we're really gearing up for the next few weeks to be something short of something we've never seen before. And the hope is that the overwhelming American voters decisively choose who they want to be the next president.
All right. Philip Bump, Marquise Francis, thank you both for joining me.